the submerged reality. The Sophiology. Sophia is the submerged reality, but nowhere more submerged than in Catholicism, I think. Because it's certainly submerged in Protestantism and other religions, but in Catholicism, it shouldn't be submerged. Catholicism has this tremendous and deep veneration of the Virgin Mother of God, yet Sophiology is almost unknown in Catholic theology. It appears in whispers prior to the 20th century. It appears in the Veritas of Saint Hildegard of Bingen, this greening power of all things, the livingness power, And it's interesting that Hildegard was a musician and poet as well as a scientist, at least for her time. And Sophiology always seems to arise in that constellation, that personality constellation, people who are interested in science and poetry, or involved in science and poetry in some way, or science and the arts. It shows up again, certainly in the Middle Ages, when with the devotion of the Rosary, when that becomes popular. And it was not a thing in the early church, that kind of that heavy devotion to the Virgin. And then it also, because of the Rosary and because of the veneration of the Virgin in the Middle Ages, it shows up in the crowning achievement of the Middle Ages, as some would say, the Divine Comedy, in Dante's Prayer to the Virgin. Virgin Mother, daughter of thy Son, predestined turning point of God's intention. Right? That's the prelude to the beatific vision. Very much what Slovio does with the Virgin Sophia in his narrative of the Antichrist. Also, though, Sophiology starts to emerge a little bit in the 20th century through some key Catholic theologians, Latin Catholic theologians. Like Hans Urs von Balthasar is probably, in a way, the most famous. But in his Sophiology, it stays submerged. He does not want to out himself as a Sophiologist. And I've had conversations with my friend Jennifer Martin, no relation, and she wrote an essay for the Heavenly Country because she saw it too. I mean, she did her dissertation on Balthasar and Bulgakov, and she detects a lot of Bulgakov in von Balthasar. Now, I don't know what she thinks about why von Balthasar didn't become more open with this intuition, because his work in aesthetics is extraordinary, and that's where I first found his Sophiology in his collection, the Glory of the Lord. But my suspicion is that he, somebody with ressourcement theology, working in the mid-20th century, that was a hostile work environment for those people, because the neo-scholastics were still ascendant, and they were not, just as now, they were not very kind to people who didn't toe what they thought that was the neo-scholastic line, as Henri de Lubac found out. He ended up, not able to teach for a while, and censured by the Pope of all people. It was not a good time to be interested in new ideas in the church. And another friend of von Balthasar's and a very good friend of de Lubac was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit paleontologist, who was also a poet. And his work, this idea with the omega point, that all things are leading to Sophianization, to the theosis. that got him into a lot of trouble. It still gets him into a lot of trouble. In fact, people who read my books and they like my books, they very often, if I'll get from a more traditionalist leaning person, say, I love your book, except for that part about Teilhard. You're pushing it right there. And it's too bad. It's too bad. We talk to Orthodox theologians, they love him. They don't know what the Catholic problem with Teilhard is, and I don't really know either. Other than the neo-scholastics don't like him. You know, they seem to want the church to be something else, something they can grasp. But that's the beauty of Sophiology, is it's not something you can grasp. It's you have to let it grasp you. You have to be open, and neo-scholasticism is a heavily intellectual trip, and so people who need reason and need syllogisms for everything, that's Sophiology presents them with a problem, because you have to turn it off. But I think that even St. Thomas Aquinas, that's the point he arrived at. All my work is straw. Because once you have an experience of reality, you realize the limits of rationality. Now, so the 20th century, it's interesting. So you have von Balthasar doing a kind of Sophiology without calling it Sophiology. In fact, trying to distance himself from Sophiology at the same time. He called it Bulgakov's Sophianic excesses, he called it. Nevertheless, you read him, very sophiological writer. But most of it came up in poetry by people who were on the margins, who were not in the mainstream of theology. I mean, Balthasar was definitely in the mainstream. He was right in the center of things. In fact, he was made a cardinal not long before he died by Pope John Paul II. But most of the intuitions on Sophia came through poetic utterance. And even though Teilhard, he didn't really, well, he wrote scientific papers, but he's most known for his popular works. And in his popular works, there's a very sophiological strain, though he never uses that word except for in his poem, which I will read a little bit from here, entitled that's not him. There he is. Here he is. I didn't have him in the poetry section. I always forget. The Eternal Feminine is Teilhard's poem. And toward the end of that poem, here's what he says. Lying between God and the earth, as a zone of mutual attraction, I, this is Sophia speaking, draw them both together in a passionate union. Until the meeting takes place in me, in which the generation and plenitude of Christ are consummated throughout the centuries. I am the Church, the bride of Christ. I am Mary the Virgin, mother of all humankind. It might be thought that in this conjunction of heaven and earth, I am destined to disappear as a useless handmaid, that I will have to vanish like a shadow before the reality. Those who love me should dismiss this fear. Just as participated being is not lost when it attains its principle, but on the contrary finds fulfillment in melting in God. Just as the soul, once it is formed, does not completely exclude the countless elements from which it emerged, but retains, as essential to it, a potency for and a need for flesh in which to contain itself. So the cosmos, when divinized, will not expel my magnetic influence, by which the ever more complex and more simplified fascicle of its atoms is progressively more closely and permanently knit. I shall subsist entire with all my past, even in the raptures of contact with God. What is more, I shall continue to disclose myself, as inexhaustible in my development as the infinite beauties of which I am always, even if unseen, the raiment, the form, the gateway. It doesn't get any more sophiological than that. That's where I am. The unseen, the raiment, the form, the gateway. We talked before, Sophia's absolute humility. And Teilhard intuits it here. Amazing. And this is, I mean, if you read Teilhard, I mean, he's really a beautiful writer. Writes beautiful prose. His Hymn to the Earth may be one of the more beautiful things I've read, and of course the Eternal Feminine is incredible as well. In fact, his friend de Lubac wrote a book called The Eternal Feminine, which was kind of an explication of this poem, but also as a defense of Teilhard, because he certainly thought Teilhard was getting a raw deal when he was shut up by the Jesuits and by the Vatican. And he was getting a raw deal. Another place where this poetic intuition comes is probably an expected place to find it, because he was kind of a radical thinker. As rooted as he was in the tradition of Catholicism, Thomas Merton was a radical thinker. That's what's beautiful about his thought, is he's both rooted in the tradition and not afraid to, he doesn't turn the tradition into an idol, which is, I think, what happens very often in some forms of traditionalism. They get stuck on wanting it to be like it was, and the whole idea with the tradition is it's always breathing and living. It's not something something you preserve. It's something that lives. And he wrote a poem, Hagia Sophia. He was very inspired by Bulgakov and the Russian sophiologists as well. And here was a guy who really, at the heart of his project, was an ecumenism but not an ecumenism that, like I call it the I am okay, you're okay ecumenism. His ecumenism was authentic, I think. I mean, he didn't want people to sell out. He wanted us to find the center. T.S. Eliot. And so I'll just read a little bit from the dawn, the hour of lauds part from Merton's Hagia Sophia. There is in all visible things an invisible fecundity, a dimmed light, a meek namelessness, a hidden wholeness. This mysterious unity and integrity is wisdom, the mother of all, natura naturans. There is in all things an inexhaustible sweetness and purity, a silence that is a fount of action and joy. It rises up in wordless gentleness and flows out to me from the unseen roots of all created being, welcoming me tenderly, saluting me with indescribable humility. There it is again, humility. This is at once my own being, my own nature, and the gift of my Creator's thought and art within me. Speaking is Hagia Sophia, speaking is my sister, wisdom. There again. The Virgin Sophia's virginity is not sterility, it's fecundity, it's fertility. I always thought that Sophiology could have saved the Catholic Church from its current troubles, I think. If they taught Sophiology and had seminarians develop, a healthy relationship to craft, to gardening, to the world, to things of this world, not just, live in the abstractions of theology and philosophy. It would have done a lot for them. And then they could read some Sophiology and get in touch with what's real. Because if you don't have a worldview that's congruent with reality, and Sophiology is reality, then you're really mentally ill to a degree. It's pathological. Now another poem, and we could keep reading them. I think another one I could read, which I won't read, is a beautiful poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, "The Virgin Mary Compared to the Air We Breathe." But I think what I'll read instead is a piece from a very underappreciated and overlooked poet these days. He was known during his poetic career, at least for a while, as Brother Antoninus. And actually taught down the street from where I used to teach. It was 30 years before I taught there. He taught at the University of Detroit for a while. But he left religious life and got married. His name is William Everson. And he wrote a really fine poem called A Canticle to the Great Mother of God. And let's read you a little excerpt from that. But always there is something eludes us, mother, city and citadel, proud battlement and spire, croft, granary, and the cool sky-thirsting towers. Obscure behind those nodes, those many mingled lights that wink and then well up, pale opals on the movement of your breasts, or the navel cuspid's moonstone at your womb. Always your essence hovers. The flashing glances of the sea belt you about with brightness, blind our eyes, and the famished senses swoon of that vaunted spicery. So lush, so erotic, so full of life. I mean, you read this poem, the whole thing, there's such an energy to the lines, such a movement to the lines, because there's exuberance, which figures Sophia's action in the world, but as we know, her action in the world is humble. It's exuberant, but it's invisible in a sense, or we're so inured to it we don't notice it. So it's really important, I think, to recognize how these poets were intuiting the Sophianic. Because let's face it, with whomever we're talking about, if they were to be brought up before a committee wondering if they're writing heresy, they'd say, "Oh, hey, it's just a poem. It's just writing a poem." Because they're not trying to propose some new doctrine, because I think the church gets freaked out about that. But maybe, as we found out, starting with Margaret Barker, maybe Sophia was there all along and we weren't told. Or she was hidden from us, right? There's Gnosticism again. She has been hidden. Of course, she hasn't been hidden. We just stopped finding her. But then probably the most fascinating Sophiologist, we can say, of the 20th century was Valentin Tomberg. And Valentin Tomberg was Russian. His family was all killed during the Bolshevik Revolution, and he had, for a while, he was kind of a leading anthroposophist. He was a very original thinker. In fact, before he came to Western Europe and still in Russia, he apparently was connected with a group studying the tarot, and studying Hermeticism. And then he moved from that to anthroposophy, but then he was kind of chased out of the Anthroposophical Society for whatever reason. It's not always hard to say. But then during World War II, he was in a home for displaced persons, or a camp for displaced persons, he and his wife and son, and they entered the Catholic Church at that time. I understand there was, was at least a flirtation with Orthodoxy, which would kind of be natural for a Russian. He was actually a Lutheran from birth, but he encountered Orthodoxy, I think, in Holland, and eventually entered the Catholic Church, to which he was devoted, and he kind of rejected all of his anthroposophical activities, from what I can tell. And, some people will dispute that, but he just put it behind him. I'm Catholic now, and all I do is contemplation. He wrote in a letter. But in his masterwork, we could call it, which is Meditations on the Tarot, which is probably, you will not find a more unique work of Catholic devotion, philosophy, mysticism, theology, I don't know what to call it. You'll not find a more unique work in all of Catholic theology and Catholic world. And in the 19th letter, which is for the tarot card, the Sun, he has an extended meditation on Sophia and how Sophia is important for theology and important for Catholic theology to take in. So I'll read a little bit what he said. It is she, the Virgin of Light of the Pistis Sophia, the wisdom sung of by Solomon, the Shekinah of the Kabbalah, the Mother, the Virgin, the pure celestial Mary, who is the soul of the light of the three luminaries, and who is both the source and aim of Hermeticism. For Hermeticism is, as a whole, the aspiration to participation in the knowledge of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the Mother, Daughter, and the Holy Soul. The Mother, Daughter, and the Holy Soul. Make sure you caught that. It is not a matter of seeing the Holy Trinity with human eyes, but rather of seeing with the eyes and in the light of Mary Sophia. For just as no one comes to the Father but by Jesus Christ, so does no one understand the Holy Trinity but by Mary Sophia. And just as the Holy Trinity manifests itself through Jesus Christ, so understanding of this manifestation is possible only through intuitive apprehension of what the Virgin Mother of Jesus Christ understands of it, who not only bore him and brought him to the light of day, but who was also present as Mother, at his death on the cross. And just as wisdom, Sophia, as Solomon said, was present at the creation, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, then I was at work beside him, from Proverbs 8. And built her house upon, and set her upon 7 pillars, Proverbs 9. So Mary Sophia was present at the redemption, and was at work beside him, and built her house, set up her 7 pillars. That is, she became Our Lady of the 7 Sorrows. For the 7 sorrows of Mary correspond for the work of redemption to the 7 pillars of Sophia for the work of creation. Sophia is the queen of the 3 luminaries, the moon, the sun, and the stars, as the great portent of the Apocalypse shows. And just as the Word of the Holy Trinity became flesh in Jesus Christ, so did the light of the Holy Trinity become flesh in Mary Sophia. The light, that is, the threefold receptivity, the threefold faculty of intelligent reaction or understanding. Mary's words, "Let it be to me according to your word," are the key to the mystery of the relationship between the pure act and the pure reaction, between the word and understanding, lastly, between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit on the one hand, and Mother, Daughter, and Holy Soul on the other. They are the true key to the seal of Solomon, the hexagram. So, and it goes on to talk about this, but this is kind of, he's thrown all of his cards down on the table. Now, Valentin Tomberg, almost very few Catholic theologians have read him. I know quite a few who have, but relatively speaking, he's had very little impact on Catholic theology. Well, very little impact as of yet, we should say. Because I think, there's some bold sayings here, right? And I think another way to think about Sophia Mary, in not just Catholicism, but in all of Christianity, and this is one that I shouldn't say constantly, but regularly contemplate, and this is Mary's presence at the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. Because we often forget that Mary was present with the apostles, and I always think of Mary at Pentecost as almost like a lightning rod who brought the Holy Spirit down. The incarnate, the bestowal of the Holy Spirit on the apostles came through her. I mean, it's probably heretical of what I'm saying, but I think that's what happened. And I think that probably eventually the Catholic Church will recognize it as such, because it just fits with everything else. It fits with Proverbs. I was there at the beginning. It fits with the incarnation of Christ, and it would only make sense and only be fitting to have Mary be present at the bestowal of the Holy Spirit. She's Mary Sophia because she's the conduit of splendor, the conductor of splendor. Sure, God could pick a different way to do it, but that's not how he did it. And if we look back to Barker's work, to what we talked about from Genesis, it's not good that man should be alone. Let us make man in our image, male and female. So I think, this is what I think is so submersive about the submerged reality. That's why we're at my pond, by the way. Is that this is almost like the revelation to come, but it's always been there, and so it's not a revelation. It's just an understanding about Mary's presence and the presence of the feminine in the life of the church. I mean, the church has always acknowledged Mary, going back on our earliest feasts. Some of them were to the Virgin, but it seems that we have to take it up a level, and I think that's what will happen. Who knows when it'll happen? But I think the 20th century will be looked upon as an important moment in Catholic theology when these poetic intuitions from Merton, Teilhard, I could have mentioned Louis Boyer, who drew a lot on Bulgakov, and we see the importance of the Russian Sophiologists, but also you look at the importance of the Protestant Sophiologists, going back to Portage and Burma, Jane Led, Thomas Bromley, and the Germans, is that this is an ecumenical project. It's much bigger than one denomination, and perhaps like Soloviev infers in the narrative of the Antichrist, that a true Sophiology will only be born once, it'll be in cooperation with the reunion of the churches. You have to think about that. But we'll talk about that next time in the conclusion of this course on Sophiology. So I'll see you then.